I always knew it had to happen one day. But what I didn't know is that I would be the one to do it. So I spent 9 years of my life in university, just so I could write my final paper on Minecraft Let's Plays. You know, talking about questionable life choices, that's certainly one of them. You might now think that I must have studied something like digital media or communication or at least English literature. But nope, I studied German philology. But we'll come back to that later, how that happened. And the core idea of that paper stems from an observation. And that, by the way, comes from somebody who has played that game and watched Let's Plays for more than 10 years at that point. That Let's Play videos have majorly changed. Yeah, I know, I'm not the first one to make that observation and it's not a revolutionary discovery. But what has changed is that nowadays many Let's Play series, especially the bigger ones, have a lot of narrative elements to them. Vampires or empires? Why do these two actually rhyme? Surely that's not a coincidence. But also the Life series are very obvious examples where that's the case, but also Hermitcraft has these days a lot of narrative elements, while 10 years ago, Let's Plays were just somebody sitting down and playing the game. Those kinds of videos still exist, of course, but it's really the more complex type, which, for somebody who spent many years in university studying literature, seemed very promising to look at. Especially considering, as I have been very unhealthy about certain Let's Play series over the years, and already analyzed them in my head in many different ways, because that's kinda what you do. You know, if you spend half of your life watching YouTube videos and the other half in university, things clash in very weird ways. And for the paper I've ultimately chosen False Symmetry's Empire series, and that's simply for the reason because in her perspective the overlap with the Hermitcraft server is the most pronounced, or actually most important to her storyline, as her whole twin story evolves around that. And I'm sorry if I now spoiler you, but if you haven't watched False Symmetry's Empire series yourself at that point, what are you doing? I guess that's pretty much your own fault. But where was I? Yes. Her twin, or clone, it never gets fully disclosed what she actually is, Empire's Falls, awakes in a strange new world without any memories about her past home, which was Hermitcraft. And slowly but surely, she puzzles it together. Just to give you a brief overview, and that's all you need to know at that point. So we have a very complex narrative thread. And that is just perfect for a final paper. Oh well, but out of the many things I've described in the paper that I analyzed and looked at, there are 3 things I want to point out, because they are probably the most important. First of all, I made also in the paper the differentiation between simple Let's Plays and complex Let's Plays. So what is the exact definition? Well, a Let's Play is then complex when the Let's Player adds elements to the videos or streams that don't arise from the game itself. And you could say that this is probably the case for every Let's Play there ever was. Which leads me to the very important truth that there is no strict line between what is a simple and what is a complex Let's Play. What you will rather find is that all videos are somehow a combination of both, but if you trust your instinct, I think the differentiation is often quite clear, where it's just, on one hand, somebody just playing the game experiences what happens as it comes, and on the other hand, where you have kind of a narrative already figured out beforehand. Like players from another universe arriving, or maybe even more pronounced in Empire Season 1, where you have a demon going around. And typical for complex Let's Plays is that their overarching narrative has a clear structure, like you would find it in a novel or in a movie. I'm not going to analyze that structure here in that video, I've done that in the paper of course, but there is one thing I want to point out. In every good movie or novel you have something that is called the inciting moment. The inciting moment happens right after the setup, where the most important character is introduced, the world is introduced, something happens, some unordinary event that needs to be resolved, that kicks off the rising action. And you have one of them, right? And I was trying to find that one moment, but I wasn't really able to do so. Because I didn't only find one, I found two. If you watch your perspective from the beginning, then it's very easy to think that in the first episode, where the players find out that the end portal is open and the dragon is gone, which of course foreshadows the arrival of the hermits, as another player group has to be somewhere in this multiverse, however you want to call it. And while this is only the first of weird events that follow after, the expected rising action isn't really happening. Then, many episodes down the line, you have the portal, the rift that opens up. And that is when the roleplay parts really become way more pronounced than they have been before. So that is the second inciting moment. But also that cannot really be the inciting moment, because then we would have to ignore the lore sign, the pumpkin man, which are clearly part of the rising action, even though they were quite subtle so far. So I did what you always do when you can't decide. I took both. Clearly we have two inciting moments here, and the reason that's the case is actually quite simple. Now, let's take a completely different example. Take the live series, where we also have inciting moments in episode 1. Maybe in Secret Life these are the tasks, things like that. But now imagine if we had a red life already in the first episode. And mayhem would break loose already in the first episode. I'm not saying that wouldn't be fun to watch, but it kinda would break with what you would expect from a Let's Play series. Because then there would be no room for base building. There would be no room for just friends doing stuff together. It's really that elongated part of the rising action. You know, between the first and the second inciting moment, where in a complex Let's Play, you have your typical relaxed Let's Play videos that give you as a viewer everything you expect and why you are watching a YouTube Let's Play and not a TV series. Because you have that calmness, you have that sense of relaxation, and ultimately the attachment to the world and to the characters. Imagine if the lighthouse from Past Life would have been there since episode 1 and burnt in episode 1. It just wouldn't be the same. And that is exactly the case also with Empires. You need that calm before the storm, the long stretch of just building and only little lore elements before you start with a narrative heavy part. So it really can combine the best of a Let's Play series and storytelling. And now to point 3. My professors didn't quite agree with me on that one, but then again I also did a really bad job explaining that in the presentation after I have written that paper. So maybe I do a better job here. But that boils down actually to the core difference between a simple and a complex Let's Play. I know we had that differentiation before, but there is something very technical about that. In every piece of literature, you have 3 roles to fill. You need the author, who creates the piece of literature. You need a narrator, which tells a story. And you need the figure, the character the story is about. And in a simple Let's Play, all 3 of those are exactly the same. Why? Because a Let's Player who is the author of the video, or the live stream, plays as themselves and tell their own story from their own perspective. And that is what makes a simple Let's Play. But in a complex Let's Play, there is a subtle but very important difference. The narrator and the figure are still the same, because obviously the main character, like Empire's Faults, tells or rather shows her own story. But the narrator is not identical to the author. Because obviously Fault Symmetry knows the backstory of Empire's Faults, but her played character does not. Maybe here I should also point out that whenever I talk about the author, I'm actually talking about the implied author. Why is that important? Because we actually don't know anything about the real person who writes a book or records a Let's Play video. And for Let's Plays that's particularly important to point out, as due to the parasocial effect of those videos and streams, we tend to think that we know the people behind them. Let's take Gemini Tay for example. If you know her, then you probably have only good things to say about her. But in real life, she could be a serial killer and we wouldn't be none the wiser. Even though thinking about that would actually suit her Minecraft character pretty well.
They're gonna die.
Oh well, but you get the idea. We don't know anything about the real persons behind the videos. But still, we as an audience build up an image of what we think the author must be like. And that is what you call the implied author. But back to the paper. So, the narrator and figure are the same in a complex Let's Play, but the author is a different person. Good. But that leads to some very weird situations. For example, if False, or Empire's False, asks the audience for build ideas. Who's speaking here? Is it really Empire's False, or isn't it actually the author who wants to get ideas from her audience? And even more evident is that voice break. You know, not to be confused with a voice crack.
Should we go underground?
When in one episode, False mentions that she won't be able to record for a week and therefore doesn't have a video for the next week or something like that, which has nothing to do with the narrative or the world or Empire's False or anything story or Minecraft related. It is an IRL statement that she's out of the house. And that clearly comes from the author, not the narrator. And yet it is delivered to the audience in the exact same voice. Seemingly from the exact same Minecraft avatar. But how can it be that the author speaks through the figure if you already have established that figure and author are different? Do you find that also with novels, you might ask? Yes, but in a novel, it is very clear which voice is which, because if the author mentions, I don't know, I've written also this book, then that is not part of the novel itself. It might be printed on the back flap, but it's clearly separated. But with a Let's Play you don't have that separation. And I'm not talking about that the figure is generally talking to the audience, because that is something that a fictive narrator can very much do, but I'm talking about those instances when it's clearly referring to something that's happening outside the Minecraft world. You could of course say that this is simply an alternation between the author and the fictive narrator, but because these changes are so frequent and usually impossible to mark down, especially as there's no change in tone and the only thing you can go off is really the content, what's talked about, I think we have here something new that you simply don't find in novels or in movies or any other form of literature. So I proposed in my paper a new term, which describes the merger of the fictive narrator, in this case Empire's False, with the implied author, who we think false symmetry is IRL. And that blend I gave the name of the fictive author. Now what does that fictive author do? Primarily it's the fictive narrator, which is that made-up voice that tells the story. But as that voice also takes up some of the author's duties, like talking about real-life events that have no meaning in the Let's Play world, that narrator gets elevated to the author level, comparable with the author of a simple Let's Play, but with a simple but very important difference that in a simple Let's Play, the implied author seems to be the actual person behind those videos, even though IRL that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, we've talked about that. In a complex Let's Play, that is clearly not the case, as we are very well aware that the narrator that talks to us, the Minecraft character that talks to us, is not the real artist speaking to us, but a made-up character. And yet, that made-up character tells us things that make in her world absolutely no sense and clearly come directly from the author. And that is what I want to call the fictive author. And that fictive author is what separates a complex Let's Play from a simple Let's Play, where the author is rather the implied author. Does that make sense? I hope I haven't lost all of you. If I did, I'm sorry. But that was the best I could do. I've recorded that part now for the 4th time. There are of course also many other things I've mentioned in that paper. I've described the camera settings and the camera work. Then I also talked about inter and intermediality. What the heck are these terms? Well, intermediality is if one media refers to a different media. For example, when in Empire's Twilight gets constantly mentioned, as Twilight is not a Let's Play series. That is an intermediality, and intermediality would be if one Let's Play refers to a different Let's Play. So for example, when Sausage refers to Blood Sheep, that's an intermediate reference to Empire Season 1. I've also talked briefly in the paper about the history of Minecraft on Let's Play videos, about the whole scene, and also made the very interesting discovery that in Ethos single player playlist, episode 513 is missing. You still find that episode on YouTube, but it's for some reason not in that playlist. And if you want to read the full thing, I've translated and updated it, because guess what? In 1 year of Minecraft and Let's Play history, a lot of things happen. I've linked the latest version of that paper down below. So feel free to read it, but be warned, it is a scientific paper after all. So some chapters need a bit more patience to read than others. You know you don't get your master degree for nothing. And how was I able to write a paper about English Minecraft Let's Plays and German philology? Well, the reason actually is quite simple. Even though I was a bit scared if I find a professor who would accept such a paper, I very quickly received the feedback that what I'm trying to analyze here is how those Let's Plays tell the stories. And that is mostly independent from the chosen language. So everything I've talked about in my paper can probably also apply to Let's Plays in German or any other language. I enjoyed writing it, even though it was a lot of hard work, and I'm quite proud of it. It's probably the only thing I produced in university where I'm proud about, but that one I think was a good one. Nonetheless, I hope that after doing this video, I can finally go back to just record regular Minecraft Let's Plays. However, it's up to you to decide whether my videos are simple or complex Let's Plays. Take care and bye!